In a world where power and pride often define greatness, one ancient sermon continues to whisper a radically different truth: that true strength is found in humility, mercy, and forgiveness. Over 2,000 years ago, on a quiet hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, Jesus delivered a message that would reshape the moral foundation of humanity. This was the Sermon on the Mount, not a call to conquest or wealth, but a call to the heart. Imagine the scene: crowds of people, weary from life's burdens, gathered around a teacher whose words pierced deeper than any sword. He spoke not to rulers or scholars, but to ordinary men and women, fishermen, mothers, farmers, people who longed for hope in a world filled with injustice and fear. Yet what they heard that day was not a list of laws or rituals. It was an invitation to transformation, an invitation to live differently. The meek shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful. Love your enemies. These phrases sounded almost impossible then, as they do now. But within them lies a timeless wisdom, a reminder that the greatest revolutions begin not with weapons, but with compassion, not with wealth, but with purity of heart. Today, as society grows louder and more divided, the Sermon on the Mount remains a quiet guide for anyone seeking peace amid chaos. It challenges us to rise above anger, to forgive even when it hurts, and to act with integrity even when no one is watching. Its power endures because it speaks to what we all share: the struggle to live rightly in a world that often rewards the opposite. Throughout this video, we will explore how this single sermon distilled the essence of Christian ethics: humility over pride, mercy over vengeance, forgiveness over judgment, and spiritual authenticity over empty appearances. Whether you are religious or simply curious about timeless wisdom, these teachings invite reflection, not dogma. Transformation, not condemnation. If you believe the world could use a little more kindness, understanding, and truth, you are in the right place. Stay with us as we uncover the profound lessons hidden within these ancient words and discover how they still echo through every act of compassion today. Before we begin, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, not just to support us, but to join a growing community of people who believe that goodness, love, and understanding still matter. Now, let us journey back to that hillside in Galilee, where one voice changed the meaning of greatness forever. As the sun rose higher over the Galilean hills, a golden light spread across the crowd seated on the rocky slopes. The morning air was still, yet every heart trembled with anticipation. Among the faces, young and old, rich and poor, there was a shared longing, an unspoken question that hung in the air: what does it truly mean to be blessed? For generations, people had been told that wealth was a sign of divine favor, that power and prosperity proved one's righteousness. But what Jesus spoke that morning would overturn those assumptions and forever redefine the meaning of happiness and success. With a calm voice that carried effortlessly through the still air, he began to speak. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The words seemed to ripple through the crowd, confusing some and comforting others. Poor in spirit, not the proud, not the powerful, but those who understood their need for something greater than themselves. Jesus was not praising weakness, but humility, the kind of heart that stays open, teachable, and aware that life's greatest strength comes from grace, not from control. He continued, Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. To many who had lost loved ones or endured injustice, those words felt like a gentle hand resting on their shoulders. Jesus was not glorifying sorrow. He was revealing that pain, when met with faith and compassion, becomes a doorway to deeper peace. It was a radical promise that even in life's darkest moments, the divine presence could bring comfort stronger than despair. Then came the line that stunned the proudest among them. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The world admired warriors, kings, and conquerors, But here was a teacher proclaiming that true victory belonged not to the ruthless, but to the gentle, those who ruled their own hearts instead of others. Meekness, in his teaching, was not weakness. It was power under control. It was courage shaped by compassion. The quiet strength that refuses to harm even when it could. As the crowd listened, they began to realize that this sermon was not about obeying external rules but transforming the soul. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. This was not a hunger for wealth or fame, but for justice, for a world made right, where mercy and fairness guided every decision. He spoke to those who were tired of corruption, those who longed for honesty in a world that often rewarded deceit. When Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy," his words struck deep. Mercy was not weakness. It was the highest form of strength, the ability to forgive when vengeance would be easier. In a time when retaliation was considered justice, he offered a new kind of courage, the courage to let go. The people could sense that what he was teaching was not just a code of behavior, but a way of seeing the world, a vision where compassion replaced cruelty, and love was the true measure of greatness. Then came the promise of purity. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It was not the outwardly religious or those who performed rituals perfectly who would experience the divine, but those whose intentions were honest and hearts uncorrupted by greed or pride. In those words, he offered liberation, freedom from pretense, from the exhausting need to appear righteous, to see. He taught, one must first clear away the noise within and look with eyes of sincerity. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That line carried a quiet power that silenced the crowd. The land was filled with conflict, political, social, and personal. Yet Jesus was not calling for passivity but for active reconciliation, for the courage to mend what was broken. To make peace was to reflect the Creator's own heart, to build bridges where others built walls, to answer hatred with understanding. As the sermon unfolded, something extraordinary began to happen. The people realized that every blessing Jesus spoke of described not the rich, the dominant, or the flawless, but those often overlooked, the humble, the wounded, the gentle, the seekers. Each beatitude painted a picture of inner transformation, of a happiness not dependent on circumstance but rooted in the soul's alignment with love and truth. The crowd sat in awed silence as the final words settled over them like the warm light of the morning sun. Many felt a strange peace they could not explain, as if their burdens had been lifted by the sound of compassion itself. The message was clear that true joy, the kind that lasts, is not found in possessions or praise, but in the quiet courage to live with humility, mercy, and grace. That day, on the hill overlooking Galilee, the definition of blessedness changed forever. Jesus had not offered an easy path, but a meaningful one. His blessings were not rewards for perfection, but invitations to transformation. To be poor in spirit was to be open to divine strength. To be meek was to discover the strength of restraint. To show mercy was to taste the mercy that sustains the world. And so, the Sermon on the Mount became more than just a speech. It became a mirror held up to every heart, asking not what we have, but who we are becoming. Those who listened left the hillside different than when they arrived, carrying within them the seed of a new way of living, one not driven by power or possession, but by the quiet, enduring beauty of inner virtue. As the hillside cooled under the softening light of late afternoon, the crowd that had gathered to hear Jesus felt a stirring of something deeper than curiosity or admiration. They had already listened to the Beatitudes, words that opened their understanding of blessedness, shifting the focus from wealth, power, and reputation to humility, mercy, and inner virtue. Yet now, as Jesus' voice threaded through the murmurs of the wind, he began to turn their attention from external deeds to the unseen realities of the heart. revealing a dimension of righteousness that many had never considered. "You have heard it said," he began, invoking the familiar words of the law that had guided their people for generations. "You shall not murder. Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." The crowd nodded. These were commandments etched into their lives, rules that had been memorized and recited since childhood. Yet Jesus continued, "But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." His words hung heavy in the air, unsettling, because they pierced beyond the visible act into the inner currents of thought and emotion. Anger, often justified and excused, was now framed as a moral failure in the eyes of God. It was a revelation that obedience alone could never satisfy the law if the heart remained unexamined. If resentment, bitterness, or contempt quietly festered within, and he did not stop there. Moving through the familiar commandments, Jesus touched on adultery, a violation understood primarily as an outward act, and he transformed it into a matter of desire itself, a condition of the heart. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart, he declared. The crowd stirred, for this teaching demanded a level of integrity they had scarcely been taught to measure. It was not enough to avoid transgression in action. Purity of thought was the standard, a constant vigilance over the subtle workings of the mind and the longings of the spirit. In this, Jesus redefined the very essence of law. It was not a checklist to be followed mechanically, but a mirror reflecting the state of one's soul, revealing intentions and motives that could never be concealed from God. As he spoke of these matters, the listeners began to understand that righteousness demanded more than outward conformity. Divorce, oaths, promises, and reconciliation were no longer mere social or legal obligations, but invitations to a profound internal transformation. When Jesus urged, "If you are offering your gift at the altar, and remember your brother has something against you, leave your gift there first, go and be reconciled," he revealed that relationship with others and alignment of the heart with truth were inseparable from spiritual obedience. Rituals without reconciliation were hollow. Acts without genuine love or integrity were empty. Hyperbole, as he used it in warnings about sin, impressed the urgency of these internal standards upon the crowd. "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away," he said, not to incite literal violence against oneself, but to dramatize the seriousness with which one must guard the heart against corruption. Every thought, every hidden desire, mattered as much as outward actions, for the law, in its deepest fulfillment, sought the soul's transformation. It was a radical message that would have seemed impossible to the ordinary listener. To obey God fully required more than control over actions. It required mastery of the inner life, a vigilance of mind and heart that could only be sustained by divine grace. As Jesus wove these lessons together, the crowd glimpsed the profound implications. Obedience alone, while necessary, was insufficient. Without a transformation of the heart, without addressing the root of anger, lust, pride, and hypocrisy, one could never fully enter the kingdom of heaven. Each commandment revealed a principle, not a burden, a guide to the cultivation of character that reflected God's own holiness. Mercy, purity, honesty, and love were not merely good deeds, but expressions of an inward reality, the manifestation of a soul attuned to divine will. By the time he spoke of loving one's enemies, the listeners began to perceive the extraordinary coherence of his teaching. Anger must be confronted, lust restrained, hypocrisy exposed within the self, for these were all distortions that kept the heart from aligning with the spirit of the law. To love enemies, to forgive those who wronged, to reconcile with adversaries, required the same inner transformation, the same surrender of selfish impulses, the same cultivation of a heart that reflected divine character. It was not a call to weakness or passivity, but to an extraordinary strength that originates in integrity, humility, and courage, a strength that could resist evil without succumbing to it, that could respond to hatred with compassion, that could model the very nature of God in human relationships. And so, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the people sat in a reflective silence, many feeling the weight of a teaching that transcended rules, rituals, and human conventions. Jesus had illuminated a path where obedience and virtue were inseparable from the transformation of the heart, where righteousness was not measured by what one avoided but by the depth of love, the purity of intention, and the integrity with which one lived each moment. The Sermon on the Mount, which began with blessings for the meek and merciful, now revealed a profound continuum. External behavior and inner life were intertwined, and the call to follow him demanded nothing less than a radical, heartfelt transformation. In that quiet twilight, the hillside seemed to hold its breath, for the listeners were beginning to understand that the kingdom Jesus offered was not merely a set of laws to follow, but a life to be reimagined, a heart to be renewed, and a soul to be awakened to the fullness of God's vision. The crowd had already felt the weight of Jesus' words about the heart, the invisible currents that dictated human behavior, and the call to a higher righteousness that transcended mere outward obedience. Yet, as he shifted his focus toward the radical ethic of love, a new layer of challenge unfolded before them, one that would stretch their understanding of justice, loyalty, and human interaction beyond any conventional limits they had ever known. "You have heard it said, eye for eye, and tooth for tooth," he began, invoking the familiar law that had long governed retaliation and fairness in their society, a law designed to limit vengeance and keep punishment proportionate. The crowd murmured, recognizing the principle. It was a framework that had shaped their understanding of justice for generations. But then he startled them with a radical departure from expectation. "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also." The air seemed to thicken as the words sank in, for this was not merely a call to restraint, but to a revolutionary approach to conflict, one that upended instinct and custom alike. Jesus did not frame this teaching as weakness, nor as passivity in the face of wrongdoing. Instead, he presented it as an act of profound moral courage, a way to disarm aggression not through retaliation but through unexpected generosity and resilience, to offer the coat along with the tunic, to go 2 miles when forced to go 1, to lend without expectation of repayment. These were not acts of foolishness but expressions of a principle that sought to transform the very fabric of human interaction. In the hearts of his listeners, a vision began to form, one in which the cycle of hatred, revenge, and retaliation could be interrupted not through force or cunning, but through the deliberate choice to respond with love, humility, and moral clarity. Every gesture of non-retaliation was a seed planted in the soil of human relationships, a potential catalyst for transformation that might ripple outward in ways invisible yet profoundly real. Then he expanded the teaching even further, moving from specific conflicts to the broader, more daunting task of loving one's enemies. "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy,'" he said, confronting a common cultural expectation that animosity toward enemies was permissible, even justified. "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." The crowd shifted, sensing the audacity of what he proposed. To love those who had wronged, who had insulted, betrayed, or harmed, required an inner strength that could only be nurtured by the grace of God, a transformation that extended beyond natural human inclination. This was a love that refused to discriminate, that treated friend and foe alike with dignity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to moral integrity. It was a love that challenged the very foundation of instinctive self-interest and demanded a vision of human life aligned with divine character. A love that reflected the impartiality, patience, and enduring generosity of God Himself. He illustrated the principle by pointing to the ultimate model of love. God's own care for creation. The sun rises on the evil and the good, and rain falls on the just and the unjust. If God's grace is distributed without partiality, His listeners were called to cultivate a love that mirrored this divine impartiality, extending mercy even where it seemed undeserved, generosity where it was unexpected, and prayer where animosity had taken root. It was a demanding call, one that forced them to reconsider the boundaries of human obligation and the power of the inner life to effect tangible change in the world around them. Love was no longer a passive sentiment but an active, transformative force that could alter the trajectory of relationships, communities, and society itself. As Jesus, examples from everyday life could have easily illustrated the principle. The neighbor who had insulted, the debtor who refused to repay, the enemy who sought to harm. Each situation became an opportunity to practice radical compassion. The teaching suggested that through deliberate acts of mercy and forgiveness, individuals could break free from the familiar chains of resentment and retaliation. Each act of turning the other cheek, each prayer for a persecutor, was a declaration that the human heart could choose a different path, a path of restoration and reconciliation rather than destruction. The message was not abstract. It was visceral, grounded in the lived realities of daily interactions, where the courage to forgive or extend generosity could ripple outward, creating waves of change far beyond the initial act. By the time Jesus concluded this portion of His teaching, the hillside was quiet with awe and contemplation, for the crowd had glimpsed a vision of life radically transformed by love. The call to radical compassion, loving enemies, forgiving those who harm, and actively breaking cycles of hatred was not merely a moral guideline but a revolutionary way of life, one that required the transformation of the heart, the cultivation of courage, and the surrender of natural inclinations toward retribution. In this vision, the kingdom of God was not only an ethical ideal but a practical framework for human flourishing, where mercy and forgiveness redefined relationships, reshaped communities, and reflected the very character of God in tangible, life-altering ways. Each listener left with the seed of a profound realization that true strength, true justice, and true righteousness were found not in retaliation or self-interest, but in the deliberate choice to embody love in its most radical, courageous, and transformative form. The hillside, already hushed by the weight of Jesus' previous teachings on love, forgiveness, and the radical ethics of the kingdom, grew still as He turned His gaze toward the inner life of devotion, challenging the crowd to reconsider the motives behind every act of piety. His voice, calm yet compelling, carried the authority of one who understood both the human heart and the divine standard, and He began to speak of giving to the needy. Be careful not to practice your acts of righteousness in front of others to be seen by them, He said, waving a principle that would resonate far beyond the immediate crowd. He illustrated the common practice of ostentation, where those who sought public recognition trumpeted their generosity from rooftops or streets. Yet in doing so, they had already received their reward in full. Their applause, admiration, and fleeting social prestige had replaced the deeper purpose of giving. And in this subtle but profound way, He revealed the danger that even good deeds could be corrupted when motivated by self-interest rather than divine intent. Jesus' words were not a condemnation of charity itself. Rather, He emphasized that the power and blessing of giving came from its authenticity, from a heart aligned with God's own generosity. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, He continued, painting an image of a gift so discreet that even the giver is unaware of its outward display, yet fully observed and valued by God. The lesson extended beyond the act to the transformation it wrought within the giver, an internal cultivation of humility and selflessness that reshaped the soul. Each act of unseen giving was a seed planted in the fertile ground of moral character, a deliberate alignment of human intention with divine purpose, quietly influencing both the giver and the receiver in ways that might never be publicly acknowledged, but were eternally significant. Turning to prayer, Jesus challenged another familiar aspect of religious life, one deeply ingrained in the practices of his audience. Public displays of devotion had become markers of status, performances intended to impress rather than connect. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners to be seen by others. He explained, highlighting the superficiality that could so easily creep into spiritual expression. He invited his listeners into intimacy instead, into a private dialogue with God where the focus is on sincerity rather than spectacle. Go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen, he said, emphasizing the importance of privacy and the authenticity it nurtures. In these moments, the divine gaze, not human attention, becomes the measure of faith, shaping the believer's heart in alignment with higher purpose. Jesus further elaborated on the dangers of empty repetition, criticizing the mechanical or formulaic prayers common among the people of his day. Words, he taught, were not a currency to be spent to gain God's attention, for he already knows the needs and intentions of every heart. The model he provided, the Lord's Prayer, was concise, profound, and God-centered, encompassing worship, submission, daily provision, forgiveness, and protection, offering a template that guided both the inner disposition and outward communication. Each phrase invited reflection, intimacy, and alignment with divine values, not public display or rhetorical flourish. In teaching prayer this way, he revealed that true spiritual efficacy did not lie in quantity or visibility, but in the quality and sincerity of engagement with God, a transformative approach that nurtured humility, mindfulness, and moral clarity. Fasting, too, became a canvas for his teaching on the integrity of devotion. The audience would have recognized the common spectacle of fasting faces deliberately disfigured, actions exaggerated to draw attention, but Jesus reframed it entirely. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting, he said, acknowledging the ritual yet condemning the motive. Instead, he taught, apply oil, wash your face, and carry on normally, so that the act is visible only to God. This instruction carried a radical principle, that devotion is measured not by the notice it attracts, but by the alignment of the heart with God's will. The authenticity of intention, rather than the recognition of peers, determined the spiritual value of the act, cultivating an internal transformation that outward appearances could neither fake nor fully capture. Throughout these teachings, a unifying thread emerged, the call to sincerity, integrity, and internal transformation as the essence of faith. Every act, whether giving, praying, or fasting, was reframed not as a performance but as a private, intentional gesture that reflected the condition of the heart. The crowd could sense the profundity of the principle, for it struck at the very core of human motivation, challenging them to look beyond outward appearances, social approval, and superficial markers of piety, toward an enduring, God-centered authenticity that reshaped character and relationships. In this vision, the practice of faith became a living art of moral and spiritual alignment, a quiet but powerful testimony to the principles of the kingdom, one that could transform the individual from the inside out and ripple outward to touch society in unseen yet profoundly meaningful ways, revealing that true devotion is measured not by visibility or acclaim, but by the depth and integrity of the heart. As Jesus drew his teachings to a close, the crowd, already captivated by the profound simplicity and radical depth of his words, leaned in closer, Sensing that the lessons they had just received were more than mere guidance, they were a blueprint for life itself. He paused, allowing the weight of the earlier messages to settle in their hearts. The blessing of humility, the transformative power of mercy, the courage to forgive, and the quiet strength found in authentic devotion. Then, in a manner both vivid and unforgettable, he spoke of two builders, each constructing a home with equal effort but with profoundly different foundations. One built upon rock, steady, unyielding, able to withstand storms and floods, and the other upon sand, shifting and weak, destined to collapse when challenged by life's trials. This metaphor, simple yet piercing, encapsulated the essence of his sermon, that the teachings of the kingdom, when fully embraced and lived out, create a life anchored in enduring faith, while superficial compliance and empty religiosity leave one vulnerable to spiritual ruin. The imagery resonated because it was universal. Every person listening could imagine a house buffeted by wind and rain, standing firm or falling to pieces depending on its foundation. Jesus' point was unmistakable. Life would inevitably bring trials, injustices, heartbreak, and moments that tested courage and character, and only those rooted deeply in the principles he had outlined: love, integrity, compassion, and sincere devotion would remain unshaken. Those who merely paid lip service, who sought praise and visibility, or who focused on external appearances without cultivating inner virtue, were like the builder on sand. No matter how impressive their home seemed on the surface, the contrast was stark but fair, offering both warning and hope. Warning against hollow living, and hope for those willing to transform their hearts. As he continued, Jesus reminded them that these teachings were not abstract ideals reserved for spiritual elites. They were practical, accessible, and transformative in daily life. Living on the rock did not mean a life without struggle, it meant a life equipped to meet struggle with wisdom, patience, and resilience. Every act of true compassion, every moment of authentic prayer, every choice to forgive and love rather than retaliate, was another stone in the foundation, steadily reinforcing the soul against the inevitable tempests of existence. Conversely, those who neglected the inner life, who measured success by recognition rather than virtue, would find that when hardship came, their foundation offered no support, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. In this way, Jesus' metaphor bridged divine principle and human experience, turning ethical and spiritual truths into a vivid guide for practical living. The crowd, composed of people from every walk of life: fishermen, tax collectors, laborers, and teachers, could see themselves in this image, each pondering where they had been building, consciously or unconsciously. The metaphor was inclusive yet deeply personal. It asked no credentials, demanded no ritual perfection, and promised no immediate reward. Instead, it offered a clear pathway, a life of integrity, humility, and compassion, rooted not in fleeting acclaim but in enduring truth. By embracing these principles, anyone could construct a spiritual home capable of withstanding the unpredictability of the human experience. A home that nurtured not only the individual, but the broader community through love and justice. Jesus' final words carried both encouragement and challenge, reminding his listeners that the act of building on rock was ongoing. It required constant vigilance, self-reflection, and commitment to living out the values he had outlined. It was not a one-time achievement but a lifelong endeavor, a daily choice to align thought, word, and deed with the higher calling of moral and spiritual integrity. Each decision to act justly, to extend mercy, to forgive, or to serve quietly without expectation of recognition, was like adding another layer of stone to the foundation, ensuring that the home of one's life could endure. In contrast, reliance on external approval or superficial observance offered no such reinforcement. and the metaphorical house built on sand was inherently precarious. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the hillside where the crowd had gathered, a profound silence descended, filled with reflection and awe. People felt a stirring within, an awareness that what they had heard was not merely another sermon, but a revolutionary call to rethink how they measured success, virtue, and happiness. Jesus' teaching on foundations challenged not only personal conduct, but the broader understanding of what it meant to live well, to love sincerely, and to pursue justice with integrity. Those who embraced it could face life's inevitable storms with confidence and grace, while those who ignored it risked disillusionment and collapse. The clarity and elegance of the metaphor made it unforgettable, a guiding image that would echo through generations, reminding all who heard it of the enduring value of inner transformation over outward display. As we reflect on this teaching today, we are invited to consider our own lives and the foundations upon which we have built our values, our relationships, and our sense of purpose. It is an invitation to shift focus from recognition and reward to authenticity, from fleeting approval to enduring virtue, and from superficiality to depth of character. Every action, every choice, every gesture rooted in sincerity and compassion strengthens the foundation, making it more resilient and capable of withstanding the inevitable storms we all face. Conversely, ignoring these principles, prioritizing appearances, or seeking accolades at the expense of genuine integrity, weakens the foundation, leaving our lives exposed to disappointment and failure. In embracing the rock, we embrace not only stability but also the fullness of a life aligned with timeless wisdom and divine guidance. Thank you for joining in this reflection on the profound lessons of the Sermon on the Mount. If this story has touched your heart, inspired your thinking, or encouraged you to examine the foundations of your own life, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to explore more stories of faith, wisdom, and transformation. Your engagement helps share these timeless teachings with a wider audience. And together, we can continue to build lives on the rock of enduring principles and meaningful values.